The wind rolled like a restless ghost across the open plains, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and the distant cry of a lone coyote. The night was a velvet curtain of stars, stretched wide over the sprawling land. At the edge of a quiet ranch, the only sound was the creak of an old wooden sign swaying gently in the breeze. Beneath that sign, a tall figure moved slowly through the shadows, his boots whispering against the dusty ground. His name was Jack Callahan, a rancher with a heart carved out by hard years and lonelier nights. Folks around town called him Silent Jack, because he didn't speak unless words were worth saying. He'd buried more pain than most men ever lived through, and the ache in his chest had long become a part of who he was. He had built this ranch with his own hands after the war had taken everything from him, his family, his hope, his peace. But tonight, as he led his weary horse into the barn, something felt different. Something was coming. The wind carried a sound that made him stop, soft, broken, like the cry of someone who had run too far for too long. Jack stiffened. He wasn't a man who ignored trouble, not when it knocked on his door in the dead of night. With quiet steps, he walked toward the sound. Just beyond the barn doors, near the fence line, lay a woman, her dress torn, her hair tangled with the dust of the road, her breathing shallow but alive. Jack knelt beside her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered open, blue like a stormy sky, filled with both fear and fragile hope. "Don't stop," she whispered weakly, her hand trembling as it reached for him. Jack's chest tightened. He thought she was begging him not to leave her alone. In truth, her words held layers he didn't yet understand. He carried her inside the ranch house, laying her gently on the couch near the fireplace. She was light, too light, as if life had already taken more than it should from her. He covered her with a wool blanket, stoked the fire until the flames licked the air, and sat down across from her, his jaw tightening as he studied the bruises on her wrists. Someone had hurt her. Someone had chased her all the way to his door. And that someone might not be far behind. When she woke again, the storm in her eyes had softened just enough for him to see the woman behind the fear. "Where am I?" she whispered. "My ranch," Jack said simply. "You're safe here." Safe. It was a word she hadn't heard in a long time. Her name, she told him, was Lily. She had come from the town downriver, running from a man who thought he owned her. Her father's debts had sold her future to a cruel saloon keeper, and when the nights grew too dark to bear, she'd fled on foot through the cold and the mud. "He'll find me," she said, her voice shaking. "He always does." Jack's jaw hardened like stone. He didn't like men who broke women. He didn't like cowards who hid their cruelty behind power. "He'll have to go through me first," he said. And in that moment, Lily believed him, not because of the way he spoke, but because of the way his silence held the weight of a man who meant every word. As the night deepened, the rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like soft knuckles. Jack gave Lily warm soup, wrapped her hands in cloth to keep them steady, and let her sit close to the fire. She watched him, this quiet, weathered man who asked for nothing and gave everything without saying a word. She had never met someone like him. And something inside her, a tiny flicker long thought dead, began to warm again. Hours passed. Outside, the rain turned into a storm. Thunder rolled across the plains like a warning. Jack loaded his rifle, checked the locks on the doors, and paced the floor. He wasn't scared, he'd faced worse, but he was ready. Lily watched him move, strong and steady, like the storm itself bowed before him. She whispered softly again, "Don't stop." Jack turned, misreading her trembling voice. He thought she meant the steps, the protection, the strength. He didn't know yet that what she feared most wasn't the man chasing her, it was losing the fragile safety she'd felt for the first time in years. When the banging came at the door, it was loud and merciless. "Open up, Callahan," a voice bellowed through the storm. "You've got something that belongs to me." Jack's knuckles tightened around the rifle. His eyes met Lily's, wide and wet. "You don't belong to him," Jack said softly. She shook her head, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. The door shook again. Jack opened it slowly, stepping out onto the porch like a shadow carved from the night. There stood a man in a black coat, mud splattered up to his knees, with a cruel grin on his face. "Step aside, Cowboy. The girl's mine." Jack's voice was low, cold as steel. "She ain't anyone's but her own." the men laughed. "You gonna make this hard?" Jack didn't answer with words. He cocked the rifle, and the sound sliced through the thunder like a blade. "Get off my land." What followed was a silence so thick it could choke a man. Then the outlaw reached for his gun. But Jack had spent years living on the edge between life and death. His shot rang out like the voice of justice itself. The outlaw's gun clattered to the ground, his pride falling with it. He stumbled back, holding his shoulder, his rage burning hot but not hotter than the pain. "This ain't over," he spat before vanishing into the storm. When Jack walked back inside, Lily was on her feet, trembling. "You could have died," she whispered. "I've already lost everything, I couldn't bear it if..." She stopped, unable to finish. Jack took off his hat, ran a hand through his wet hair, and said in that quiet voice of his, "I ain't going anywhere." Something broke inside her then. The walls she'd built, the fear she'd carried, all cracked beneath the weight of his quiet strength. She stepped toward him, slowly, like someone learning to walk again. The firelight cast a golden glow around them, the rain softened outside, and for the first time, she wasn't running anymore. She laid her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that hadn't given up on life, even when it had every reason to. Jack wasn't a man of fancy words or promises carved in gold. But as his arms wrapped around her, she understood something simple and unshakable: she was safe, truly safe, for the first time in forever. "Don't stop," she whispered again, but this time he understood. She wasn't begging him to fight, or to run, or to stand guard. She was asking him not to let this fragile moment of peace slip away. Not to let her fall back into the darkness she'd escaped. He rested his chin gently on her head and whispered, "I won't." The storm outside began to fade into a soft drizzle. The land that had been carved by loneliness now held two souls who, against all odds, found warmth in the cold. Jack knew trouble wasn't over. The men would come back. But for the first time in years, he had a reason to fight, not just for the ranch, but for something far more precious. And Lily, broken but not defeated, found the courage to stand again, not as someone owned, but as someone free. That night didn't just change her life. It changed his too. A man who thought he'd been living in silence discovered that sometimes, the softest whisper can be the loudest call to start living again. As the fire crackled, painting their shadows against the wall, a quiet promise filled the room, not in words, but in heartbeats. Some stories don't start with love. They start with pain, with whispers, with a single night where everything changes. And for Jack Callahan and Lily, this was that night. Morning sunlight spilled across the plains, turning the wet earth golden. Lily woke to the scent of coffee and the steady scrape of Jack's boots on the porch. For the first time in years, her heart wasn't racing from fear. Jack stood with quiet strength, watching the horizon, knowing trouble wasn't far. She stepped out, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. He glanced at her, not with pity, but with respect. "He'll come back," Jack said. She nodded. "Then we'll face him." Those words surprised even her. The scared woman who'd arrived last night was gone. In her place stood someone ready to fight for her freedom. Jack handed her a cup, and their fingers brushed, brief, warm, electric. No promises were spoken, but something solid settled between them. The wind carried the faint echo of hooves in the distance, a reminder that their fight wasn't over. Lily straightened, shoulders steady. Jack stepped closer, close enough that she felt the heat of his strength. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "you're not alone anymore." Her heart pounded, not in fear, but in hope. That whisper from the night before still echoed between them. And this time, he understood it completely.